cases. Could you share a bit about the writing process? So one thing that really interests me is you mentioned before we started this conversation that you decided to adopt a modular approach to the case. Could you say a little bit about what that's involved and why you chose to adopt that approach?
Essentially, as we've mentioned already, there was that gap in the market that we couldn't really fill with existing cases, in the sense that when we wanted to teach about business models, business model innovation, and in particular the later aspect, which is a digital transformation of an incumbent of an existing company to a platform type of business, we just couldn't find a case like that. But then when you think about, in the case of strategy, about the entire process, starting from external, internal analysis through more minute details of how a strategy is being designed and implemented, there are a range of steps that you would like to follow with that case study. So we looked at each of those stages and we considered, what is it that, if you were to analyze from a strategy perspective, Ryanair's business model and trace that evolution over time, what would be the different types of analysis that would need to be carried out? And we took that approach step by step, creating chunks of content within the case study and the associated teaching note. And that creates the opportunity for us and for other case facilitators to maybe pick and choose. If there is a particular framework that someone needs to illustrate or get their students to work with, there is plenty of data in the case to do that. And I think that's one of the beauties of Ryanair as a company as well, that we could actually find ways of using multiple different frameworks with this case. That makes this case quite versatile. That makes it quite applicable and modular in that sense as well. Now, it's a fairly rich case, so we actually had a lot of secondary data that we used, we collected and used for writing that case. They were newspaper articles. We had plenty of interviews with the executives, in particular with Michael O'Reilly, but not only, that were available in the public domain. So there wasn't even a need to try and get additional information. There was enough, if not too much of it, out there in the public domain. And we sifted through that and we complemented it with industry reports, consulting firm analysis that were available again publicly, to identify those bits and pieces of data that would be really important for students' ability to then effectively apply the various frameworks. So it was the case of collecting the information and matching it or mapping it onto those different frameworks that we knew would be relatively convenient to illustrate with the case of Ryanair. So that was essentially the process. And I think if there was that opportunity to illustrate the varying frameworks and different approaches in strategy analysis of Ryanair, created a bit of a challenge as well, in that we actually had too much material, and we really had to work hard to cut the case to a manageable length and decide on maybe what we cannot really include in a single case like that. So even that modularity had to be restrained in that sense. We could probably write another case out of the material we still have on Ryanair with a different focus, with a slightly different angle. So it's a rich story that can be told about this company, and we had to pick and choose in that sense.
The one piece of advice that I got at the outset of the process, we have a colleague, Dr. Eleanor O'Higgins, who was, you might remember, Richard, a previous case winner for Ryanair as well.
Of course.
And Eleanor gave me a really great piece of advice, and that was start with the teaching note. Start with a very, very clear teaching objective, rather than starting with the case itself. And both Dorota and I were very familiar with Ryanair. We had been using Ryanair as an example in the classroom for years through, newspaper articles, vignettes, interview pieces. And so we had a good understanding of the issues. And we were able to kind of start almost with the teaching note before we had a rough outline of the teaching note before we even began writing the case itself. And I think that together with the modular approach served us quite well.